Hi, this is Lacey,
And Robin.
and we're in Glasgow, Scotland at COP26 with Bloomberg Green. Um, One of the things we wanted to talk about next was nature-based solutions at scale. So we had the pleasure of hearing the CEO of Unilever speak. Really fantastic session. By the way, we'll do a whole session on it. It made me want to shop at Unilever. It was one of the best or byproducts from Unilever.
Product placement.
No, really. I mean, I was so impressed. It was so much content, and so little BS compared to what I'm used to hearing, really from anyone outside of academia on this topic. He really knew. He was so fluent in a lot of the dynamics and topics around climate transition. So anyway, we'll do a session on that. But one of his highlights, he's from Glasgow, so his highlight was seeing his sister this week, but his second highlight was seeing the rise of nature-based solutions at scale. I don't really know what that is, or I wasn't sure what exactly that means, and so I wanted to ask Robin. What does that mean? The first thing I think of is like, okay, let's plant a bunch of trees and then don't do it in Brazil, so we know that they don't get cut down, and maybe like turn some land into a swamp. But we probably need to zoom out and help people understand, what does this mean? What's a nature-based? What's a solution? Like, what does that mean? What's it the nature-based part, and what does that scale mean?
Well, first of all, it's basically, we're talking about solutions to get to net zero, right? To get to net zero emissions, where you have the emissions that we put out into the atmosphere via mostly burning of fossil fuels, and then we have basically the carbon sinks on the other side, right? Which is photosynthesis, or basically the absorption of the earth or the ocean,
right,
of carbon, or wetlands, etc.
If I can pause you there, if you don't know about the carbon cycle, Google it now. Wikipedia, really important. It's a cycle. We don't just emit and then have to emit less. There's actually, net is an important part of the system that we're interacting with, and there are sinks as well, carbon sinks.
I mean, our ambition should really be a lot higher than net zero, right? Because basically we've put a bunch of trash, we've dumped out a lot of trash, right? We should be getting rid of the trash. So we should go towards negative emissions or be climate positive, right? But I mean, net zero is already a massive challenge. So let's stay at that baseline for now.
So the nature-based solutions at scale live inside of this carbon cycle. So you talked about solutions. What does nature-based mean, as opposed to what else?
For example, you could take carbon out of the atmosphere and then store it underground, right? Mm-hmm. That's not right.
Is that bad?
It's. I mean, it's basically like it's a little bit dramatic to compare to nuclear waste, but it has a potential to leak, et cetera, et cetera. So it's like you can use industrial processes to basically transform it into rock, et cetera, et cetera. So I mean, obviously you can say, okay, well, some of it is industrial, some of it is chemical, right? So I mean, but nature-based solutions mostly refers to like rewilding, like reforestation, like really kind of enhancing nature, the planet's ability to absorb carbon by itself without us adding basically industrial processes to it.
So if we just take the morality out of the conversation, right, which is one of my favorite things, and just think about industrial or chemical versus nature-based solutions, how do those compare? Are they all great and we should have a portfolio of all of those? Maybe it's a leading question, but
there's some principles by which the nature of carbon offsets are usually analyzed or assessed. For example, permanence and additionality are two of those principles, and permanence is a big one that was discussed this morning, right? So for example, if you're planting a tree, at some point the plant dies, or the tree dies, and then carbon gets partly emitted back into the atmosphere, or maybe there's more wildfires, so then get the carbon monoxide again, etc. And so basically a lot of people are questioning, and I mean, basically saying nature-based solutions at scale aren't permanent, right? So there was a strong argument in favor of a portfolio approach, right? And that also there was a bleeding into, what do companies actually claim? Do they claim, hey, we're carbon neutral, right? Like, are you, as an airline, right, should you be claiming that you're a carbon neutral company if you've invested in non-permanent
right.
solutions.
And maybe we'll talk about that in the carbon offset topic. But so just sticking on the nature-based solutions at scale topic. So they're like nature-based solutions, they have pros and cons compared to an industrial or chemical solution.
Yeah. For example, the
permanence and
permanence and basically they're also a lot cheaper, right, than the industrial processes, which is maybe counterintuitive, but you can establish nature-based solutions for maybe 10, 20 euros per ton of CO2, whereas the kind of more industrial processes cost you 100, 200, or 1,000 euros per ton.
Right, yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so can you give us some examples of nature-based solutions?
Yeah, like reforestation, for example, or like enhancing wetlands, reducing rewilding by reducing the footprint of humanity, like by basically, mostly it's like reducing animal agriculture. So going vegan basically allows us to use more.
Wiping out a volcano. One category of emissions is volcanoes.
Yes, right? But not a material one.
Not material, but probably don't focus on that. No, I think the topic of rewilding is really cool. Like, I wonder if we'll see it. We already are seeing a trend, but people buying land where cows used to graze and turning it into a wetland, right? And I think it's a cool idea and definitely possible.
Or reversing desertification.
Right. Yeah, makes sense. Okay, cool. So then let's talk about the last piece, at scale. What's that mean? What do people mean by that?
I think it's pretty subjective where you draw the boundary.
But like maybe me, like buying a cow farm, a dairy farm, and turning it into a wetland, that's probably not at scale.
No,
right?
But if you're collecting, if you're getting 1 million people to offset their emissions and thereby fund the rewilding of whole ecosystems, that would certainly qualify.
So it's probably like you need some mechanisms in place to commercialize or monetize the nature-based solutions to make it at scale, right? I would assume. So turning it into a marketplace, making there a way for somebody to buy the offset or the credits.
There's several mechanisms in place. There's a basic compliance market, and then there's a voluntary carbon credit market as well to facilitate that.
Yeah. Cool.
But one more thing, there's also basically, I think if you're just going to separate it into nature-based versus industrial, right, then you're forgetting, for example, clean cooking, right, where you're replacing the use of solid fuels in Southeast Asia and Africa, right, where people are cooking with solid fuels, and that creates indoor air pollution, which kills 4 million people a year, right? So I think it's always you have to be careful not to create categories that...
It also creates a lot of emissions, right?
Well, it's indoor air pollution. I'm not sure about the total impact on climate, but it does have, yes. And the thing is, you can save lives in the short term and long term, right? Which is it's a very cheap offset as well, right? So I think there's, again, we have to take the morality out of it and kind of apply the right frameworks and find the right prioritizations.
Got it. Makes sense. Very cool. Well, thanks, Robin. And we'll be back later.